Everyone loves a good mystery. From a young age, we're hooked on that classic trope of the perfect crime solver. Just think of Batman cleaning up the streets of Gotham, or the classic CSI team cracking impossible murders with nothing but a single strand of hair. This premise grabs our attention because we simply love watching geniuses bring order out of pure chaos. And when it comes to genius, the first name that comes to mind is Sherlock Holmes. We instantly picture that proper English detective peering intensely through his trusty magnifying glass. But what almost no one saw coming was that television would take this massive icon and give him a major reality check. And that's where the show we're dissecting today comes in. Sherlock, basically the definitive recreation of the character, only dropped right into modern-day London, wearing nicotine patches and oozing boundless arrogance. The show delivers heavy psychological plot twists and villains who embrace insanity just for the fun of it, all wrapped up in an utterly addictive game of cat and mouse. So today on the channel, Sherlock, a protagonist who borders on the unbearable, but who, at the end of the day, is absolutely brilliant. John Watson is a former military doctor who has returned from Afghanistan with PTSD, a hand tremor, and a psychosomatic limp. His therapist suggests he write a blog to cope with the stress, but John swears his life is a total bore where nothing ever happens. Meanwhile, London is in chaos. Three completely different people, a suit, a teenager, and a politician, turn up dead after taking a poisonous pill. The police are treating it as a series of suicides. During a press conference, Detective Inspector Lestrade tries to calm the media, but everyone in the room receives a simultaneous text message saying only "wrong," a classic power move. The mysterious sender signs off only as "shh," trying to find a cheap place to live. John bumps into an old friend who takes him to a morgue. That's where we meet Sherlock Holmes, who is beating a corpse with a riding crop just to test an alibi. Sherlock borrows John's phone and in under a minute deduces that he is an army veteran. His limp is psychosomatic and his brother has a drinking problem. He casually drops an address, 221B Baker Street, and leaves. The next day, John and Sherlock go see the flat. The landlady, Mistress Hudson, gives them a discount on the rent because Sherlock ensured her husband got the death penalty in Florida. Lestrade shows up unannounced. A fourth victim has been found, and this time, a note was left behind. Sherlock invites John to the crime scene, and the ex-soldier accepts immediately, practically buzzing at the chance to see some action. At the crime scene, Sergeant Donovan calls Sherlock a freak. In response, he exposes in front of everyone that she's having an affair with Anderson, the forensics expert, based purely on his deodorant and her scuffed knees. The victim, a woman dressed in pink, used the last seconds of her life to scratch the word Reich into the floor. Anderson thinks it's German for revenge. Sherlock knows it's Rachel. He quickly deduces that the woman's suitcase is missing and that the killer was the one who brought her there. John steps out to hail a cab but is intercepted by ringing payphones on the street and shoved into a black car. He is taken to an empty warehouse where a man in a suit, leaning on an umbrella, offers John money to spy on Sherlock. John refuses without a second thought. The man notices that John's hand has stopped shaking and gives him the real diagnosis. John isn't suffering from combat stress, he simply misses the war. Ignoring the warning, John fetches his gun from home and heads back to the flat. Sherlock has found the victim's suitcase, but the phone is missing. They text the device and go to a restaurant to stake it out. After a bizarre dinner, a suspicious cab pulls up outside. They sprint across London in a dash worthy of a Mission Impossible movie to intercept the car, only to discover the passenger is just an American tourist. When they return home, Lestrade is conducting a fake drug bust at the flat just to force Sherlock to share what he knows. They discover that Rachel was the name of the victim's stillborn daughter, but Sherlock's mind finally pieces it together. Rachel isn't out of grief. It's the passcode to the woman's smartphone. They track the phone's GPS and realize it's right there at Baker Street. The killer is the cabbie waiting for them outside. The cabbie sends a text, and Sherlock goes downstairs. The man confesses to the crimes but says he will only reveal the details if Sherlock gets in the car. Sherlock, driven by pure ego, accepts the invitation. The cabbie takes Sherlock to an empty school. His game is simple. Two identical pills on the table. One is safe, the other is lethal. He plays mind games with his victims until they choose the wrong one, all sponsored by a mysterious man who pays for the murders to secure the future of the cabbie's children. He challenges Sherlock's intelligence. Sherlock, unable to resist proving he is a genius, picks up the pill to take it. Out of nowhere, a gunshot shatters the window window and hits the cabbie dead in the chest. John, shooting from the building across the street, has just saved the day. Sherlock rushes over to the dying cabbie, steps on his wound, and demands the sponsor's name. The man screams Moriarty and dies. Outside, the police surround the area. Sherlock covers for John, and the two share a laugh over the fact that the doctor just executed a man. The umbrella guy shows up again, and the truth comes out. He is Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock's older brother, who essentially runs the British government.
Mummy? Who's mummy?
Mother, our mother. This is my brother, Mycroft. Putting on weight again.
Losing it, in fact.
Sherlock and John slip away to grab some Chinese food, officially the most dangerous duo in London. At the National Antiquities Museum, pottery expert Su Lin Yao finishes a tea ceremony demonstration and dismisses her colleague Andy, warning him that he wouldn't like her if he really knew her. She's not playing hard to get. Shortly after, while working late, she finds a covered statue, pulls off the tarp, and freezes in terror at what she sees. Meanwhile, John Watson is losing a fierce battle against a self-checkout machine at the supermarket. When he gets home complaining about technology, he finds Sherlock putting away a sword, with a crazy guy dressed in a tunic knocked out cold on the living room floor. Apparently, just another normal day at Baker Street. Sherlock is bored, turning down cases, until he needs to go to a bank to meet Sebastian, an old college acquaintance. The building was broken into overnight, and bizarre symbols were spray-painted on the wall and over the chairman's portrait. Sherlock refuses payment for the case, but John, who is broke, accepts it immediately. Doing his usual absurd visual sweep, Sherlock figures out that the message could only be seen from one specific office, Eddie Van Koon's. They go to the guy's flat, but no one answers. What does Sherlock do? He breaks into the upstairs neighbor's balcony, leaps down like a stuntman, and enters through the unlocked door. Inside, he finds Van Koon dead with a gunshot wound to the head. The police, led by Detective Inspector Dimmock, are ready to close the case as a suicide, but Sherlock destroys that theory in 10 seconds. The victim was left-handed, and the gunshot was on the right side. Furthermore, the killer stuffed a black origami lotus into his mouth. The guy was waiting for the killer, fired a shot, missed, and the bullet went out the window. The problem is, Van Koon isn't the only one. A journalist named Brian Lucas is also running for his life, locks himself in his flat, and dies exactly the same way. The killer simply scaled the building and came in through the skylight. The guy isn't just a marksman, he's practically Spider-Man. John gets a job as a locum doctor at a clinic with Dr. Sarah to pay the bills, but the case doesn't stop. They discover that the symbols on the walls are numbers from an ancient Chinese numeral system. Retracing the victim's steps, Sherlock figures it all out. Van Koon and Lucas were antique smugglers working together. One of them stole something extremely valuable, and since the killer didn't know who did it, he took them both out. The clues lead to Su Lin's flat, where Sherlock is nearly strangled to death by a figure hiding in the shadows. He barely survives, and the duo tracks her back to the museum. Hiding in the dark, Su Lin confesses everything. The symbols belong to the Black Lotus Tong, a Chinese crime syndicate, and the stealthy assassin, it's Ji Zhu, the spider, who happens to be her own brother. He demanded her help to find the stolen item. When she refused, he marked her for death. And before Su Lin can decode the entire message, her brother shows up and shoots her. No mercy. The mood turns grim. Sherlock realizes everyone involved belonged to the syndicate. At the hospital morgue, he asks Molly Hooper to unzip only the feet of the body bags. Bingo. They all have a Black Lotus tattoo on their heel. The investigation leads them to discover that the mafia uses a traveling Chinese circus as a cover to slip in and out of London. John takes Sarah on a date to this circus, which had all the makings of a romantic evening, until Sherlock shows up. The three end up backstage trading punches, sword strikes, and blows with the assassin acrobats. John is definitely the worst guy in the world to go on a date with. Back at the flat, things spiral out of control. Su Lin had left one final translation, 9 million. While Sherlock goes out to find the book that acts as the cipher key, John and Sarah decide to order takeout. Except it isn't the delivery guy knocking on the door, it's the mafia. They are kidnapped and wake up tied up in an abandoned train tunnel. The leader of the Black Lotus, General Sean, mistakenly assumes John is Sherlock. She places Sarah in the crosshairs of a giant crossbow triggered by a leaking sandbag. Pure James Bond villain torture. Meanwhile, Sherlock figures out that the code book was the London AZ Street Guide, which everyone owns. The message demanded the return of a jade hairpin valued at £9 million. He rushes to the tunnel just in time. Chaos erupts. John manages to throw himself to the ground and deflect the crossbow, which fires and impales Ji-Ju. General Sean escapes. And where was the £9 million hairpin? With Amanda, Van Koon's assistant. The smuggler had stolen the historical jewel, thinking it was a cheap market trinket, and gave it to his secretary as an apology gift for ditching her over the weekend. Murders, codes, and international assassins, all over a cheap consolation prize. In the end, General Sean is seen hiding out, typing an apology on her computer to her mysterious benefactor, referring to him only as M. She promises him that he is safe and that she would never betray him. M reassures her, and immediately afterwards has a sniper put a bullet through her head from outside the window. For John Watson, opening the fridge to find a severed human head sitting amongst the groceries has become routine. Sherlock is the kind of guy who, when bored, solves the problem by emptying a revolver into his own living room wall. To make his mood worse, he is furious with John because the doctor's blog exposed to the world that the great genius knows absolutely nothing about basic astronomy. The boredom ends when a mysterious explosion destroys the building across the street. Shortly after, Mycroft shows up asking for help to find a flash drive containing top-secret missile plans, stolen from an MI6 clerk who turned up dead on the train tracks. Sherlock, with zero interest in national security, pushes the case onto John and focuses on what really caught his eye: an anonymous package containing a pink phone identical to the one from the first victim they investigated together. It's the beginning of a macabre game. The phone sends encrypted messages, and Sherlock receives calls from innocent people strapped into explosive vests. He has a tight deadline to solve each puzzle, or the hostage turns to dust. Basically, it's Saw with a better budget. The first target is an old pair of sneakers. In the lab, we get one of those scenes where Molly tries to make Sherlock jealous by introducing her new boyfriend, an IT guy named Jim. Sherlock doesn't even blink before ruining the moment, proving in seconds that Jim is gay, detailing his underwear, and revealing the phone number the guy left hidden for him. With the distraction out of the way, Sherlock cracks the riddle. The sneakers belong to a boy who drowned 20 years ago after being poisoned through his eczema medication. Time's up, hostage saved. The game, however, is relentless. In the second round, Sherlock discovers that a bankrupt banker faked his own death with frozen blood to flee to Colombia. In the third, the victim is a TV star killed by lethal Botox injections administered by her own houseboy. Sherlock solves the case in time, but the hostage makes a fatal mistake and describes the kidnapper's voice on the phone. The criminal doesn't hesitate. He detonates the bomb, taking out the victim and the entire building. The message is clear. The villain, who we now know is named Moriarty, does not bluff. The fourth enigma raises the bar. It involves a museum security guard strangled by a giant hitman over a lost Vermeer painting valued at £30 million. And guess how Sherlock proves the painting is a fake? He points out a supernova in the painting's sky that only appeared 200 years after the era it was painted. The irony is perfect. The same astronomy he despised earlier that day ended up saving the fourth hostage's life. The gallery owner is arrested and confesses she orchestrated everything through Moriarty's contacts. In parallel, John follows the trail of Mycroft's MI6 case. Sherlock eventually joins him, and the two discover that the clerk's brother-in-law stole the flash drive to pay off drug debts, accidentally killed the guy in a fight, and dumped the body on top of a moving train to throw off the scent. Flash drive recovered. But Sherlock doesn't care about missiles. He wants to use it as bait. He texts Moriarty, setting up a meeting at the very same pool where the boy with the sneakers died 2 decades ago. The tension is absolute. Sherlock waits at the water's edge, gun in hand, and the doors finally open. But it's John who walks in. He walks stiffly, unzips his jacket, and reveals a vest packed with explosives, a sniper's laser sight planted squarely on his chest. And who walks in right after, revealing himself to be the criminal mastermind behind every murder? Jim, Molly's IT boyfriend. Because, of course, the greatest criminal mind in London would infiltrate as the most harmless guy possible. Moriarty tosses the flash drive into the water without giving a damn. He doesn't want money. He wanted to prove what he's capable of and show that he is the perfect opposite of Sherlock. Completely unhinged, Moriarty warns that if Sherlock keeps meddling in his business, he will burn the heart out of him. He turns his back and walks away. Sherlock rushes over, rips the vest off John, and tosses it aside. The two collapse to the floor, shaking and trying to catch their breath. The piece lasts 10 seconds. Suddenly, multiple red laser sights cover both of their chests. Moriarty strolls back in. He says he changed his mind and can't leave Sherlock alive. With no way out, Sherlock raises his gun, but not at the villain. He lowers the barrel and aims it straight at the pile of explosives on the floor between them. The deadly standoff at the pool with Moriarty's snipers had all the makings of the end of the line. But then, the villain's phone rings. He simply receives a better offer, announces he's leaving, and walks out, letting Sherlock and John breathe a sigh of relief and return to the safety of Baker Street.
You'll be hearing from me, Sherlock. What happened there?
Someone changed his mind.
With the dust settled, life goes back to normal. Sherlock solves a few cases, ignores others out of pure boredom, and, thanks to John's blog, ends up becoming a sort of internet celebrity. That is, until Mycroft, dramatic as ever, calls upon the duo in a rather unconventional way, dragging Sherlock, wearing nothing but a bedsheet, straight to Buckingham Palace. The reason is delicate. A female member of the royal family had compromising photos taken by a dominatrix named Irene Adler, and the British government needs to retrieve her phone before the scandal leaks. At the suspect's house, Sherlock prepares to analyze every millimeter of the target and extract all her secrets. Except Irene Adler is no ordinary adversary, and she knows exactly who she is up against. She appears in the living room to greet them completely naked. It's the perfect armor. No clothes, no creases, no revealing accessories. Sherlock short-circuits. It's the equivalent of a blue screen of death in the mind of the world's greatest detective, rendering him unable to deduce anything about her. After a sharp game of innuendos, John does his job as the sidekick and sets off the fire alarm. Irene's protective instinct makes her look straight at a mirror, giving away the location of a hidden wall safe. But before they can act, heavily armed American operatives raid the place. They demand Sherlock open the safe. The detective deduces the passcode, Irene's exact measurements. The door swings open, and a booby trap goes off, killing one of the intruders. Amidst the chaos, Irene seizes the opening, injects a sedative into the detective's shoulder, and escapes through the window with the device. Sherlock wakes up in his own bed, discovers his code has been mysteriously returned, and that Irene has programmed her own number into his phone. And the text tone she chose? A highly enthusiastic female moan. Months pass. At Christmas, Sherlock receives the coveted phone in the mail and realizes instantly Irene sent the device because she knows she is going to die. The deduction is confirmed when he and Mycroft visit a morgue and Sherlock identifies the mutilated body of the dominatrix. But the mourning is short-lived. On New Year's Eve, Irene arranges a secret meeting with John in an abandoned power station. She faked her own death to throw off her hunters. During their conversation, that indiscreet text tone echoes through the empty corridor. Sherlock had followed John and was listening to everything. Back at Baker Street, the atmosphere is heavy. The same American agents have raided the flat and tortured Mistress Hudson looking for the phone. Fatal mistake. Sherlock may be a cold and unfeeling genius, but nobody messes with his landlady. He overpowers the leader of the raid, ties the guy up, and, in a rare fit of brutal justice, throws him out the window. Later, Irene reappears in the detective's bedroom and asks him to help her decipher a code stolen from the Ministry of Defense. Sherlock, in a mix of showmanship and brilliance, solves the riddle in seconds. It's an airline flight seat allocation. Irene smiles and texts the information directly to Moriarty, who promptly notifies Mycroft. The penny only drops for Sherlock on his way to the airport. The British government had filled an entire commercial plane with fresh corpses to trick a terrorist cell, allowing the bombing to happen without causing real casualties while protecting their espionage codes. But by deciphering the message for Irene, Sherlock handed the entire plan to the villains on a silver platter, ruining years of military planning. With the upper hand, Irene sits down with the Holmes brothers and dictates an absurd list of demands in exchange for her silence. Mycroft is cornered. Irene mocks Sherlock, claiming she played him and that the detective meant nothing to her. But Sherlock doesn't back down. He looks deep into her eyes, points out her dilated pupils, and mentions her elevated pulse during moments of intimacy. fantasy. The body doesn't lie. She fell in love. Sherlock takes her phone and types, "Sure." The screen unlocks with the phrase, "I am Sherlocked." By putting her feelings into the passcode, she lost the game. Sherlock hands the device to his brother and walks away, leaving Irene without her only bargaining chip and completely vulnerable to her enemies. Months later, Mycroft informs John that Irene was beheaded by terrorists in Pakistan, but asks the doctor to tell Sherlock she entered a witness protection program in the US. Sherlock hears the story, accepts her fate, and asks to keep her phone as a memento. What Mycroft and John don't know is what a flashback reveals. At the exact moment the executioner raised his sword in the Middle East, he whispers for her to run. It was Sherlock in disguise. He had infiltrated the cell and saved her at the very last second. Back in the present, the detective puts the phone away with a subtle smile. To everyone else, she was Irene Adler. To him, she will always be the woman. Sherlock is in the worst possible phase, dealing with nicotine withdrawal and profound boredom. Quitting cold turkey and having nothing to do makes him unbearable. That's when Henry Knight shows up with a childhood story straight out of a classic campfire tale. 20 years ago, Henry's father was torn apart by a giant hound in Dartmoor. Now, as a tormented adult, he has returned to the scene and found gigantic footprints of the beast. Sherlock almost dismisses the case on the spot, until Henry uses the word hound instead of dog. For some reason, the choice of the archaic term triggers an alert in the detective's mind. The boredom evaporates and bags are packed for Dartmoor. In the small town, the giant hound has become an urban legend and a tourist attraction. Sherlock and John soon point their radars at the nearby military base, Baskerville. Using an ID card stolen from his powerful brother Mycroft, which has become Sherlock's favorite trick for opening doors, they infiltrate the facility. There they meet genetic scientist Dr. Stapleton and Dr. Bob Franklin. Their disguise even raises suspicions and triggers a security alert, but Franklin, surprisingly, covers for Sherlock. He knows who the detective is, claims to be an old friend of Henry's father, and shows immense concern for the young man. All very convenient. At night, Henry talks about disturbing dreams, where he repeatedly sees the words liberty and inn. Sherlock decides it's time to face the problem head on, and drags the client out to the dark moor. Along the way, John gets distracted following what he thinks is a complex luminous Morse code, only to realize it's just flashing car headlights. Quite the anticlimax. Meanwhile, Sherlock and Henry reach the center of the fog-covered hollow and hear a sinister growl. Panic sets in. They flee in a hurry, and Sherlock states with absolute certainty that he saw absolutely nothing. But in the comfort of the inn, the mask slips. Visibly shaken and with his hands trembling, Sherlock confesses to John he saw the monster.
You saw what?
A hound. Out there in the hollow.
There is nothing wrong with me, do you understand?
The next day, rationality tries to regain control. Sherlock suggests that Hound isn't a name, but an acronym. The duo bumps into Inspector Lestrade, who was dispatched by Mycroft as a sort of luxury babysitter to keep an eye on his little brother. They press the innkeepers, who confess to having bought a massive dog to boost local tourism, but swear they already put the animal down because it was uncontrollable. Sherlock doesn't buy the story. He knows the truth is much more bizarre than a jacked-up mutt. Using Mycroft's pass once again, Sherlock enters the Baskerville base. This is where the detective mystery turns into survival horror. John goes to investigate the underground genetics labs, where he notices pipes leaking gas. Suddenly, the doors lock, the lights flicker, sirens blare, and he hears the growl. Trapped in the dark and terrified, John cowers in an empty cage and calls Sherlock, unable to describe what he is seeing. When the detective finally gets him out of there, a horrified John confirms he saw the damn glowing hound exactly as Sherlock had described the night before. It is by diving into his mind palace that Sherlock connects the pieces. Liberty Inn is the town of Liberty, Indiana, and Hound was a secret CIA project in the 80s focused on creating a chemical weapon capable of inducing extreme terror, disorientation, and violent hallucinations. The project was canceled after frying the test subjects' brains, but Franklin kept refining the drug in secret for 20 years. Urgency strikes when John receives news that Henry has snapped, grabbed a gun, and run off into the moor. Sherlock and Lestrade arrive in time to stop the young man from taking his own life at the sight of his father's death. Sherlock spells out the cruel truth. There was no demonic hound at all. It was Franklin himself who killed Henry's father, wearing a gas mask with red lenses and a sweater reading Hound Liberty Inn. The fog in the hollow was actually a chemical minefield. Every time Henry returned to face his fears, he inhaled more hallucinogenic gas, ensuring he would just look like a madman if he ever decided to speak up. And then, the real dog, the one the innkeepers just abandoned in the wild, appears. Under the residual effect of the gas, Sherlock even sees Moriarty's face instead of the beast's, but the mirage dissipates. Lestrade and John shoot the animal before tragedy repeats itself. Franklin tries to escape, but accidentally runs into a real minefield at the Baskerville base and is blown to bits. The next morning, drinking coffee with the tranquility of someone who just survived hallucinogenic dogs, John connects the dots. He hadn't inhaled the gas on the moor, yet he still freaked out in the lab. The penny drops. Sherlock locked his own partner in the room with the leaking gas just to test his theory in practice. The doctor, as a petty revenge, takes the opportunity to rub it in Sherlock's face that he was dead wrong in a previous deduction about the gas being hidden in the sugar, poking the detective's massive ego. While the duo returns to their turbulent routine, the British government deals with much more lethal problems. Under Mycroft's orders, Moriarty is released from a maximum security cell, and, like a completely obsessed fan, the villain has left the walls of his confinement entirely covered with Sherlock's name. The game is about to get much darker. John Watson is sitting in a therapist's chair after 18 months of not setting foot in one. He can barely speak, but finally lets out the sentence that defines it all. My best friend, Sherlock Holmes, is dead. It's a punch to the gut, and then the story flashes back 3 months in time to when Sherlock was at the top of his game. He's famous, receiving gifts, and dealing with media attention, which is a nightmare for any antisocial person, let alone him. But fame is the least of his problems when Jim Moriarty is on the loose. The guy decides to show the world what he's capable of, and does so with the greatest spectacle possible. Using only his smartphone, he breaks into the Tower of London, opens the Bank of England vault, and unlocks every cell in Pentonville prison, all at the same time. It's the kind of power display that would make any Hollywood movie hacker cry in the shower. He even writes "Get Sherlock" backward on the glass, protecting the crown jewels, puts the crown on his head, sits on the throne, and simply waits for the police to arrive. In court, Sherlock even tries to explain that the guy is a criminal mastermind, but Moriarty doesn't say a word. He doesn't need to. By secretly threatening the families of all the jurors, he walks away a free man without breaking a sweat. Shortly after, he pays a casual visit to Sherlock's flat. That's when the penny drops. The great heist was just a TV commercial. Moriarty wants to show he has a universal digital key capable of hacking into any system on the planet. He doesn't want money. He doesn't want power. He just wants to play the final game against Sherlock and win. The danger is so real that even Mycroft warns John that professional assassins are moving into Baker Street. The game truly begins with the kidnapping of the American ambassador's children, and it soon becomes clear that the goal isn't the ransom. Moriarty has set up a perfectly orchestrated plan to make it look like Sherlock has been inventing all his own cases from the very beginning. It's the gaslighting of the century. Lestrade is forced to arrest Sherlock, but he and John manage to escape. To make matters worse, the assassins start killing each other on the streets of London, fighting to keep Sherlock alive because they believe he is hiding the universal key, which Moriarty supposedly left in the flat. The icing on the cake of insanity comes when they discover the villain's masterstroke. Moriarty has created a fake identity, a certain Richard Brooke, an actor supposedly being paid by Sherlock to pretend to be a criminal mastermind. With the newspapers ready to publish this story and destroy the detective's reputation once and for all, Sherlock realizes he's cornered. He leaves John behind, goes to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, and admits to the mortician, Molly, that he needs her help. Meanwhile, John discovers that it was Mycroft himself who leaked Sherlock's personal information during Moriarty's interrogations. The final confrontation takes place on the roof of Bart's hospital. John is lured away by a fake message about Mistress Hudson getting shot, leaving the two rivals alone. Face to face, Moriarty drives the final nail into the coffin. There is no code. There is no universal key. He simply bribed everyone. The whole farce was built to force Sherlock to commit suicide in disgrace. If he doesn't jump off the roof, Moriarty's henchmen will kill John, Mistress Hudson, and Lestrade. The tension reaches its absolute peak. Sherlock realizes that Moriarty has a fail-safe code to call off the hits, and makes it clear he would do anything to force him to use it. Moriarty, realizing that Sherlock is just as ruthless as he is and won't back down, takes the only action that guarantees his ultimate victory. He shoots himself in the head. Without Moriarty, there's no way to call off the assassins. The only way out is the fall. Sherlock calls John, who is desperately running back to the hospital. In this final call, deeming it his suicide note, Sherlock lies. He says it was all a fake, and then he throws himself off the roof. A cyclist knocks John down on the pavement, and when he manages to get up, he only has time to see his best friend's bloody body being carried away by the paramedics. Back to the future, John is standing in front of Sherlock's grave with Mistress Hudson. He cries, begging and pleading for his friend not to be dead. And watching from the shadows, in absolute silence, Sherlock Holmes observes the scene. Sherlock falling off the roof, only to be saved at the last second by a bungee cord. He swings through a window, kisses Molly Hooper, and moves on with his life while an illusionist hypnotizes John down on the street to buy time. The scene is completely absurd, and it has to be because this is just a crazy theory from Anderson's head, who even started a fan club to try and prove the detective faked his own death. Detective Inspector Lestrade, of course, couldn't care less about these conspiracies. Meanwhile, reality is far less glamorous. Far from London, in Serbia, a man with long, dirty hair is chained up and taking a beating in a military interrogation. It's Sherlock, obviously. Even while bleeding, he breaks his torturer's psychological state by deducing that the guy's wife is cheating on him with the neighbor. The man storms out in a rage, revealing Mycroft sitting in the dark corner of the room. The older brother has come with a warning. A massive terrorist attack is going to happen in London. It's time to come home. In England, John is trying to move on. He returns to Baker Street to tell Mistress Hudson he's going to propose to his girlfriend Mary, and takes the opportunity to remind her, for the 1000th time, that he's not gay.
That's my motto.
Listen to me. I am not gay.
The setting for the proposal is a fancy restaurant. The problem is the waiter with a ridiculous fake mustache and a terrible French accent interrupting him. Sherlock thought that popping up out of nowhere in a cheap comedy disguise would be a hilarious surprise. The result is anything but funny. John goes into shock and then explodes in anger. He attacks Sherlock right there and then. The doctor's fury is so great that their argument drags the duo through 3 different restaurants, ending with Sherlock sporting a cut lip and a bloody nose. Ignoring the detective's awkward apologies, John walks away, outraged by the 2 years of fake mourning and absolute silence. Without his partner, Sherlock goes on his comeback tour around the city, revealing he's alive to Mistress Hudson, Lestrade, and even inviting Molly to solve a few cases in John's place. On one of these quick jobs, an underground worker shows him security footage where a man named Lord Moran boards a train car and between one station and the next, simply vanishes. Sherlock and John's relationship is only forced back on track when John is drugged and kidnapped right outside Baker Street. Mary receives a cryptic text, rushes to Sherlock, and the two steal a motorcycle to track down the hideout. They arrive in time to pull John out of the middle of a giant bonfire, sparing the doctor's life by a matter of seconds. With the tension temporarily set aside, Sherlock and John join forces to figure out the underground mystery. They deduce that Lord Moran didn't vanish into thin air. The entire train car was diverted to an abandoned station, strategically located beneath the Houses of Parliament. And worse, the train car isn't carrying a bomb. It is the bomb. They break into the tunnels and find the car, but as soon as they step inside, a timer is activated remotely by Moran. 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. Sherlock panics, admitting he has no idea how to defuse the explosives. Prepared for the end, John delivers a profound speech, forgiving his friend and calling him the best and wisest man he has ever known. As the clock ticks, the story cuts away to deliver the answer everyone was waiting for. Sherlock recorded a video for Anderson's fan club explaining what really happened on the hospital roof. There were 13 possible scenarios planned. When Moriarty killed himself, Sherlock jumped onto a giant airbag that was out of John's line of sight. Mycroft's team quickly positioned the corpse of a perfect lookalike that Moriarty himself had used in a previous crime. Sherlock then took the body's place on the pavement and used a squash ball under his armpit to temporarily cut off his own pulse, fooling John and the paramedics. Back in the bomb train, Sherlock's despair suddenly turns into laughter. The timer is frozen at 1 minute and 29 seconds. He had already flipped the off switch long before, but pretended they were going to die just to squeeze an emotional declaration out of John. A cruel tactic, but an effective one. With the threat neutralized, Moran is arrested before he can escape. Peace returns to Baker Street, where Molly even introduces her new fiancé, a guy who dresses and acts exactly like Sherlock, a glaring red flag that everyone decides to ignore. Life seems to have gone back to normal, but the calm is an illusion. In a dark room somewhere, a mysterious figure repeatedly watches the footage of Sherlock pulling John from the bonfire. The game never stops. Lestrade is about to make the arrest of the year. A gang of bank robbers who always manage to slip away is finally cornered. The perimeter is set, the tension tension is at its peak, and then his phone rings. It's Sherlock, sending an urgent plea for help. Lestrade, being the good mate he is, drops the entire operation, sends all units to Baker Street, and kicks down the door, thinking he's going to find a bloodbath. What does he find? Sherlock Holmes panicking because he doesn't know how to write a best man speech. Yeah, the detective's priorities are highly questionable. The big day has arrived. John and Mary are getting married. The mood is festive, and we meet John's old army commander, Major Sholto.
This is
Major Sholto.
After the church ceremony, the newlyweds step out, a photographer takes that classic shot, and Sherlock immediately starts doing what he does best, terrifying people. He simply interrogates all of Mary's male friends to calculate the statistical odds of infidelity. The level of intimidation is such that one of the guys spends the entire reception maintaining a surgical distance from the bride. At the reception comes the moment everyone dreads, the best man's speech. Sherlock stands up, completely awkward. He starts by reading the telegrams, one from Mike Stamford, another from a certain Cam regretting the absence of Mary's family. Then, Sherlock decides to detail how he was asked to be best man, admitting he went through a roller coaster of emotions, but at the time, remained completely mute, staring at John. He uses the microphone to do what's expected, insult almost all the guests, and ridicule the institution of marriage. Except in a surprising twist, he uses this to prove how incredible John is for putting up with being the best friend of a guy as insufferable as he is. The declaration is so genuine that the guests start tearing up, and right at that moment, Sherlock decides to break the emotional mood by telling funny stories of their cases. He recalls the case of the bloody guardsman. A royal guard thought he had a stalker, and when the duo went to investigate, they found the man stabbed inside a shower, locked from the inside. Sherlock confesses he never solved the mystery of the murder weapon, but points out that while he only cared about the puzzle, John went in and saved the guard's life. Next, the speech jumps to the story of the stag do. Sherlock, with his analytical mind, calculated the exact amount of alcohol in milliliters they could drink to have an optimal night. A brilliant strategy, had John not secretly slipped in extra shots. The result is basically a London-style hangover vibe. The two stumble back to the flat, legs wobbling, and play that game of guessing the name stuck on their foreheads, where a completely plastered Sherlock can't figure out that the card on his head is his own name. In the middle of their drunken stupor, a client named Tessa comes in, swearing she dated a ghost. The two try to investigate the guy's flat, but Sherlock's brilliant mind is reduced to looking at a chair and thinking thing for sitting, before throwing up on the rug. The landlord doesn't find it funny and gets them both arrested. Lestrade bails the duo out the next day, finding the whole situation hilarious. Sobered up, Sherlock discovers that the ghost is a guy who uses the identities and flats of recently deceased men to date women. A true mayfly man, who lives that life for a day and then vanishes. He just can't find the connection between the deceived women. Back in the present, the speech is ongoing. The photographer takes another picture, and Sherlock's mind makes the fatal click. Tessa, the client from the stag do, knew John's middle name, a name he hates and hides from everyone. The only place where that was written was on the wedding invitation. The mayfly man is at the wedding. Without stopping his speech on the microphone, Sherlock's brain puts all the pieces together. The shower assassin and the mayfly man are the same person, and his target here is Major Sholto, who lives as a recluse due to death threats after a disastrous military mission in Afghanistan. All the deceived women worked for Sholto, and the killer used them to find out the single day the Major would be in a vulnerable public place. Sherlock sounds the general alarm. Sholto runs to his room and locks himself in, accepting that it's his time to die. Pounding on the door from the outside, Sherlock finally deciphers the mystery of the murder weapon, the military belt. The killer stabbed Sholto and the guardsman earlier through his tightly worn belt, which acts as a tourniquet. The wound doesn't hurt or bleed until the victim takes the belt off. Sherlock convinces Sholto to unlock the door just in time for John to administer first aid. Lestrade steps in and arrests the wedding photographer. His brother was one of the raw recruits killed under Sholto's command. With the crisis averted, the party returns to its natural flow. John and Mary dance to a waltz composed by Sherlock himself. He raises one last toast, where he lets slip mid-sentence that he deduced Mary is pregnant. He apologizes for the indiscretion, puts on his classic overcoat, and quietly slips out. While the hall remains full of life and celebration, the detective walks into the London night alone. Charles Augustus Magnuson isn't the kind of villain who gets his hands dirty. He deals in blackmail, which makes him incredibly dangerous. After putting the squeeze on a high-ranking government official, Lady Smallwood, using her husband's dirty secrets from the past, she decides to appeal to the only person capable of handling the situation, Sherlock Holmes. Meanwhile, John Watson's married life is going smoothly until a desperate neighbor knocks on his door, begging for help to find her son in a drug den. John goes to the location, finds the boy, and as a bonus, finds Sherlock completely high out of his mind. Obviously, Sherlock swears up and down that he's just undercover working on a case and denies any addiction. But the fact that he hasn't shown his face for a month since the wedding doesn't exactly help his credibility. The result of this little stunt? A direct trip to the hospital, where Molly Hooper runs a talk screen and relentlessly slaps Sherlock across the face out of pure disappointment. Well deserved. Back at flat 221B, the tension is already high when Mycroft shows up to warn them that going toe-to-toe with Magnuson is a terrible idea. Magnuson isn't just a newspaper owner, he's an information shark. But Sherlock, being Sherlock, completely ignores the warning. Magnuson himself pays a visit to Baker Street shortly after. He refuses to negotiate, casually drops the name Redbeard just to throw the detective off balance, and, to prove he owns the territory, literally urinates in Sherlock's fireplace. Basically a dog marking a lamppost but in a suit. To infiltrate the blackmailer's life, Sherlock takes a drastic measure. He gets a girlfriend. And not just anyone, but Janine, Magnuson's personal assistant, who also happened to be Mary's bridesmaid at the wedding. Using her, Sherlock and John break into the villain's high-security office. What they didn't expect was to find Janine knocked out cold, and upstairs someone holding Magnuson at gunpoint. That person is Mary, John's sweet, lovely wife. Before Sherlock can process the situation, Mary shoots him. The shot is precise and brutal. What follows is a frantic journey through Sherlock's mind palace, where he turns every gear in his brain to keep from dying of shock, even facing delusions of Moriarty mocking his pain. In the real world, his vitals drop and he flatlines on the operating table, but he manages to fight back and return to life at the very last second, murmuring only one word, Mary. At the hospital, Mary pays him a visit to ensure their secret stays between them, but Sherlock, who isn't exactly a model patient, escapes the facility and sets up a confrontation. John ends up overhearing everything from the shadows. That's when Mary confesses to being a former covert assassin, that Magnuson is blackmailing her, and that she shot Sherlock in a non-lethal spot purely to protect her cover and not lose her husband. John, understandably, is in shock. Later, she hands him a flash drive marked with the acronym AGRA, containing her entire dark past, warning him that the contents of that file would destroy his love for her once and for all. Fast forward to Christmas. John, proving to be the most loyal guy in the world, decides to toss the flash drive into the fireplace without reading a single line. He chooses his future with Mary over the ghosts of the past. But the family peace is short-lived. Sherlock decides to drug everyone at his parents' house, with the exception of John, and the two head off to Appledore, Magnuson's famous country fortress, where his blackmail vaults are supposedly kept. Sherlock's plan is bold. Offer a laptop full of stolen state secrets from Mycroft in exchange for Mary's freedom. The idea was to bait the Secret Service into catching Magnuson red-handed with classified information. But Magnuson turns the table spectacularly. He reveals that the physical files at Appledore don't exist. They never did. They are all in his head, locked away in his own mind palace of photographic memory. With this, Sherlock and John have just committed high treason by handing over government secrets in exchange for absolutely nothing, while the villain remains legally untouchable. Magnuson savors his victory. He taunts the duo and lightly flicks John's face, displaying the sheer arrogance of someone who knows he's already won the game. As Mycroft's helicopters arrive on the scene, Sherlock realizes the system cannot defeat Magnuson. There is only one way to free John, Mary, and the rest of the country from that monster's grasp. He draws his gun and shoots the blackmailer in the head in front of everyone. A bloody but decisive ending.
Merry Christmas!
To save his brother from immediate imprisonment, Mycroft pulls some strings and gets Sherlock assigned to a fatal, top-secret mission in Eastern Europe, essentially a suicide exile where his crime would be pardoned in death. The detective bids farewell to John and Mary on the tarmac, boards the plane, and prepares for the end of the line. But mere minutes after takeoff, every TV screen in England is simultaneously hacked with a looping image of Jim Moriarty asking a simple question: "Did you miss me?" Sherlock's flight immediately turns around. The game, it seems, is never over. London, 1881. Dr. John Watson returns from the war and bumps into an old acquaintance who introduces him to a rather peculiar fellow. And by peculiar, Red, a guy beating corpses in the morgue to test for bruising. In 2 seconds, the man deduces Watson's entire military history, and thus, the classic Baker Street dynamic is born. Jump to 1894, and Sherlock is now a celebrity. Watson has been publishing their cases in the Strand magazine, which annoys Mistress Hudson, as she is portrayed merely as as the woman who serves breakfast and opens the door. Watson even had to grow a mustache just to be recognized on the street. A mysterious veiled client appears in the sitting room, but Sherlock quickly ruins the dramatic disguise. It's Mary, Watson's wife. She's furious because her husband prefers traveling the country playing detective rather than staying at home. The couple's marital spat is interrupted by Lestrade, who brings in a macabre case. Amelia Ricoletti, wearing her wedding dress, had a breakdown on her balcony, shot at people in the street, and then blew her own brains out. The problem is that, hours later, the same woman in the same outfit appeared in an alleyway to murder her own husband in cold blood before vanishing into the fog. Basically a slasher horror movie, but in the Victorian era. At the morgue, the coroner, Anderson, is terrified. Hooper, whom Watson astutely notices is a woman disguised as a man to survive the era's job market, points out that Amelia's corpse now has blood on her finger that wasn't there before, along with the word "you" written on the wall. Months go by with no answers and a wave of copycat murders imitating the bride. Mycroft, now in an absurdly obese version of himself, with his brothers literally betting money on how many years it'll take for him to have a heart attack, hands Sherlock a new case. Lady Carmichael reports that her husband received 5 orange pips in the mail, a classic American death threat, and is now being hunted by the bride's ghost. Sherlock and Watson stake out the Carmichael manor. In the dead of night, they spot the specter, hear glass shattering, and find the husband stabbed upstairs. But the detail that changes everything isn't the body, but the note pinned to the dagger. "Did you miss me?" Moriarty's trademark. Back at Baker Street, Sherlock goes days without eating, injects a heavy dose of cocaine, and comes face to face with Moriarty in his living room. The villain shoots himself in the head and stands right back up, completely intact. Sherlock's brain begins to short circuit. This is where the narrative pulls an Inception-style twist. Cut to 2014. Sherlock wakes up sweating on the airplane, right after having assassinated Magnuson. This entire Victorian setting was, in fact, a drug-induced hallucinogenic trip inside his mind palace. He used narcotics to simulate an unsolved 1894 case to try and understand how the modern-day Moriarty could have survived his rooftop suicide. Back in the Victorian delusion, Sherlock and Watson break into an abandoned church with Mary and uncover the truth about the Ricoletti ghost. It was a secret society of suffragettes, including Hooper and Watson's maid. They used a terminally ill look-alike to stage the suicide, allowing the real Amelia to kill her abusive husband before being swapped out at the morgue. A network of women punishing the men who ruined them. But when the bride lifts her veil in front of Sherlock, the face underneath is Moriarty's.
Oh, Sherlock.
The dream is collapsing. Sherlock's mind hurls him to the Reichenbach Falls. Moriarty is about to push them both into the abyss, warning him that they are trapped there forever, until the Victorian Watson shows up with a gun and kicks Moriarty over the edge, dropping a meta-commentary that, as a version of John, he knows perfectly well when he's inside a story. It's the push Sherlock needed. He throws himself off the waterfall to force himself to wake up. Sherlock opens his eyes on the plane, fully back in reality. He finally understands. Moriarty really did kill himself on that roof, but he left behind a network and a posthumous plan set in motion. The game isn't over, and as the plane's engines roar, in one last reflection of the dream, the Victorian Holmes looks out the window at the 21 St. Century Baker Street, immortalized in the stories of his best friend. Sherlock is philosophizing about the tale of a merchant who tries to cheat death. It's the kind of grim monologue that serves as an immediate warning. Someone isn't making it out of this story alive. Meanwhile, Mycroft is trying to sweep the recent mess under the rug. Officially, the blackmail magnate Charles Augustus Magnuson was killed by a lone sniper, leaving Sherlock's record completely clean. The guy just dodged a murder charge. Yet during a national security meeting with the highest ranks of the British government, his biggest concern is asking the secretary, Vivian Norbury, about ice lollies and ginger nuts. Priorities. Outside this government chaos, normal life tries to run its course. John and Mary are now parents to a baby girl named Rosamund, but Sherlock can't relax. He's bordering on paranoia over Moriarty's promise of posthumous revenge. To try and find any clue to the villain's plan, he starts accepting every minuscule case brought in by Lestrade and Scotland Yard. One of them involves a wealthy young man found dead in a car crash in London when he was supposedly meant to be in Nepal. Sherlock solves the mystery in minutes, but the investigation throws him right into something much more bizarre. Someone is breaking into houses just to smash plaster busts of former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The mystery escalates when Sherlock ambushes the intruder, and the two end up in a brutal fistfight. The criminal's motive has nothing to do with politics. The final bust hid a flash drive containing all the secrets from Mary's past as a government agent. The intruder is AJ, a ghost from that very past, and he is absolutely certain that Mary betrayed him. Backed into a corner, Mary confesses the truth to John and Sherlock. She was part of a mercenary death squad called Agra, the initials of its members, where the R stood for her real name, Rosamund. To prevent betrayals, each member held a flash drive with enough information to destroy the lives of the others. The classic principle of mutually assured destruction. Everything fell apart during a rescue mission in Georgia that went catastrophically wrong under the code word AMO. The team was slaughtered, and Mary had to drop off the grid. True to her instincts, Mary uses a drugged letter to knock Sherlock out. It's impressive how he almost always falls for this, and flees around the world in pure Jason Bourne style. What she didn't expect was that Sherlock and John had planted a tracker on the flash drive. They track her down, and so does AJ. Before being killed by the police in a frantic shootout, AJ reveals that during his torture sessions in Georgia, he heard that the mission failed because of the code word AMO and an English woman. He immediately assumed this woman was Mary. Sherlock calls in Mycroft. The older brother admits that he had previously hired Agra, but swears he knows nothing about AMO. That's when the detective's mind brilliantly connects the dots. AMO doesn't mean ammunition. It's amo, Latin for I love.
You understand nothing.
The main target suddenly shifts to Lady Smallwood, whose code name was Love. But remembering a detail about how low-ranking officials are convenient because they go unnoticed, Sherlock realizes he was looking at the wrong person. The real traitor is Vivian Norbury, the harmless ice lolly secretary. Sherlock corners her at the London Aquarium. Vivian doesn't even blink as she confesses to selling state secrets and leaking the Georgia mission so terrorists would kill the ambassador and the Agra team, all to guarantee her own quiet life. When the police and Mary arrive at the scene, Vivian sees no way out. She pulls out a gun and fires directly at Sherlock. There is no time to deduce or calculate. Mary jumps in front of Sherlock and takes the bullet. The tension comes crashing down all at once. Mary collapses into John's arms, using her last bit of strength to say how much she loved being Mary Watson. Sherlock had sworn to protect her with his life, and this fatal failure creates an immediate, silent abyss between him and a completely shattered John. Grief swallows everything. Sherlock, with extreme reluctance, attempts to see a therapist, while the flat at Baker Street sinks into a thick sorrow alongside Mistress Hudson. But the past still has one last message. Sherlock receives a package containing a DVD. The title says "Miss Me," but the face on the screen isn't Moriarty's, it's Mary's. It's a posthumous message begging him for one final mission: save John Watson. Remembering the tale of the merchant, Sherlock concludes that while death may be inevitable, the way the end happens might not be a completely predetermined fate. The distance between Sherlock and John is now palpable. John tries to move on after losing his wife by seeing a new therapist, but he is hiding a heavy secret. He keeps having constant hallucinations of Mary. Meanwhile, we are introduced to Culverton Smith, an eccentric billionaire and untouchable philanthropist. He gathers his closest associates, including his daughter Faith, and drops a bombshell in a closed room. He is going to kill someone. But before anyone can react or turn him in, he injects everyone with a serum that wipes their short-term memory. The perfect crime, with a perfectly amnesiac audience. Cut to Baker Street. Sherlock has hit rock bottom, back on hard drugs, and visibly out of his mind. A woman introduces herself as Faith and hands him fragmented notes of what she managed to remember from her father's meeting. One specific word in those notes left her terrified. Sherlock initially dismisses the case for being too bizarre, but realizing the woman is on the verge of taking her own life, he decides to go for a walk around London with her. It's a surreal encounter between two broken minds wandering through the night. As they walk, Mycroft tracks his brother's erratic steps and, genuinely concerned, calls John. In the middle of the conversation, the ever-calculating Mycroft lets something intriguing slip, a subtle mention of another Holmes brother. By dawn, Sherlock decides to take the case but is hit by severe withdrawal symptoms. When he comes to, the woman has vanished without a trace. Stumbling and disoriented back home, he finally deduces what the word was that terrified her. Anyone. Culverton Smith doesn't have a specific target. He's going to kill anyone. Sherlock becomes obsessed with Smith. The level of chaos in the flat reaches a point where Mistress Hudson has to intervene, and she doesn't mess around. She subdues the untouchable detective, ties the guy up, throws him into the trunk of her car, and speeds away to John's therapist's house. And here we get one of those 4D chess moments that only Sherlock can deliver. Mistress Hudson's dramatic arrival, a luxury car sent by Smith, and even an ambulance with Molly. All of this was orchestrated by the detective weeks prior, long before John even chose that specific therapist. The two end up going to meet Culverton Smith. The billionaire takes them on a tour of the hospital's new wing that bears his name, and as casually as possible, drops hints that he's a serial killer right in the middle of a group of children. The sheer audacity of the guy is terrifying. The tour ends in his favorite room, the morgue. Sherlock tries to force a confession and uses Smith's phone to text Faith to come over, but when the real Faith walks through the door, Sherlock freezes. That isn't the woman who visited him the night before. Smith laughs, suggesting that the detective's drug-fried brain made the whole case up out of sheer boredom. Sherlock's sanity completely breaks, and he lunges at Smith with a scalpel. John steps in, disarms his friend, and unleashes all his pent-up rage on him, brutally beating Sherlock and finally throwing the blame for Mary's death right in his face.
Stop it!
Sherlock ends up admitted to Smith's own hospital, and of course, the billionaire wouldn't miss the opportunity. He enters the room through a secret passage. Sherlock, looking utterly defeated, asks Smith to kill him. The villain gladly confesses to his crimes and starts smothering the detective. What no one knew was that all of this was exactly Mary's plan. She left a posthumous video asking Sherlock to put himself in mortal danger because it was the only way to make John go back to being who he was, a doctor and a soldier who saves lives. And the gamble pays off. John sees the video, rushes to the hospital, and rips Smith off Sherlock at the very last second. Smith thinks he's still in control. After all, there's no proof of the confession, but Sherlock reveals that John's old walking stick, strategically left in the room earlier, had a hidden recording device. Checkmate. The tension between the two finally clears. John forgives Sherlock, understanding that Mary's sacrifice was her choice alone. In a moment of vulnerability, John confesses to his hallucination of Mary that he had been texting and flirting with another woman. He also finds out that Sherlock saved Irene Adler in the past and encourages him to stop avoiding the dominatrix. With their spirits renewed, they celebrate the detective's birthday, but upon returning home, Sherlock examines the piece of paper left by the fake Faith under a UV light. The hidden message glows. Miss me? At the exact same time, John goes to see his therapist, and the pieces fall into place in the worst possible way. The therapist reveals that she was the fake Faith. She was also the woman John had been texting. Her name is Eurus, Sherlock and Mycroft's secret sister. Before John can even process the sheer scale of the trap they've walked into, she points a gun at him and pulls the trigger. A little girl wakes up on an airplane and notices a terrifying little detail. Everyone, including her mother and the pilots, is completely unconscious. The oxygen masks have dropped. Panic sets in. A cell phone rings, and when she answers asking for help, the voice on the other end is unmistakable. It's Jim Moriarty, welcoming her to the final problem. Miles away, Mycroft is enjoying an old movie in his private cinema until the screen starts flashing images from his childhood and a rather unfriendly message. "I'm back." He tries to leave, but the doors are locked. He is forced into a dark hallway, hears whispers in the walls, and comes face to face with a sword-wielding clown. Basically, a deleted scene from some generic horror movie. Mycroft draws his own sword umbrella, tries to fire the gun inside it, it fails, and he flees in panic. But the terror is short-lived. The lights turn on, and Sherlock and John appear. The whole thing was nothing but a highly elaborate prank to force Mycroft to admit the truth. They have a secret sister. Back at Baker Street, Mycroft is forced to sit in the client's chair and finally spill the beans. He explains that Eurus, the youngest sister, is a genius on a level that makes the two brothers look like amateurs. In her childhood, she had disturbing habits, like cutting herself to see how her muscles worked and singing bizarre little songs about how she killed Redbeard, the family dog. After she set the house on fire, their parents were convinced she had died in another blaze. The truth? Eurus spent her life locked away in Sharonford, a maximum security prison. Mycroft guarantees it's impossible for her to have escaped. Obviously, seconds later, a drone flies through the window carrying a motion-triggered bomb that blows the entire flat to pieces. Surviving by the skin of their teeth, Sherlock and John hijack a boat and infiltrate Sherrinford, using Mycroft in disguise and staging a ruse that he was in the hospital to throw off security. Sherlock manages to reach his sister's cell, only to find out the hard way that there was never any glass separating them. She touches him, and the illusion shatters. Meanwhile, Mycroft and John discover that Eurus possesses an absurd power of manipulation, so much so that anyone who speaks with her ends up under her control. Hannibal Lecter level, just faster. The prison governor himself was already one of her lackeys. Alarms blare. Moriarty's face flashes across every screen asking if they missed him, and John is knocked out. We find out that 5 years ago, Mycroft gave Eurus a Christmas present. 5 unsupervised minutes with Moriarty. That was the exact amount of time they needed to record dozens of messages and set up the hell that is about to unfold. When John wakes up, he, Sherlock, Mycroft, and the prison governor are trapped in a cell. Eurus, controlling everything through the screens, informs them they must play a game to save the little girl on the plane. The first challenge immediately breaks them psychologically. Kill the governor or his wife dies. The man ends up pulling the trigger on himself to spare his wife, but Eurus shoots her anyway. The rule is clear. Her demands weren't met, and she even forces Sherlock to keep the remaining gun. What follows is Eurus's version of Saul. In one room, Sherlock must point out the culprit of a murder among 3 suspects suspended over the sea. He gets it right, and Eurus drops the innocent ones to their deaths, dropping the guilty one right after, just to prove that morality means absolutely nothing to her. In the next room, it's a low blow. A coffin with the phrase, "I love you," meant for Molly Hooper. Eurus claims Molly's flat is wired with explosives, and Sherlock has 3 minutes to make her say, "I love you" over the phone, without revealing it's a matter of life or death. He succeeds, shattering the girl's heart, only for Eurus to laughingly reveal there was never any bomb. Sherlock loses it and smashes the coffin to pieces with his bare hands. The final test is the breaking point. Sherlock must choose who to kill, John or Mycroft. The older brother tries to make it easier, goading Sherlock so he'll shoot him on purpose, but the detective refuses to play the game. He points the gun at his own head and starts a countdown. Frustrated at not getting what she wanted, Eurus tranquilizes everyone. Sherlock wakes up at the old family estate while trying to help the little girl on the plane to land. John wakes up chained at the bottom of a well that's filling with water, and this is where it finally dawns on Sherlock. He solves the riddle from the childhood song and uncovers the heaviest truth of all. Redbeard was never a dog. Their father was allergic. Redbeard was Victor Trevor, Sherlock's childhood best friend. The bones at the bottom of the well with John are human. The trauma was so immense that Sherlock's mind rewrote history to endure the pain. Furthermore, the little girl on the crashing plane never existed. She was a metaphor for Eurus's own mind, a brilliant, isolated, and terrified child begging for help. Sherlock finally gives her what she had always been looking for, a brother's love. The connection saves them. John is pulled from the well, and they discover Mycroft spent the whole time unharmed, locked in Eurus's old cell. The dust settles. Eurus returns to Sherrinford, but now Sherlock visits her to play the violin together, sharing the silence through a glass wall that is now solid and real. Back at a Baker Street under reconstruction, John receives one last CD from Mary. The message is simple: keep solving cases, stay together.